Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about what is going on in the city of New York because migrants are getting into ever more increasing violent instances. And for this story, we're revisiting Randall's Island yet again because there was another brawl, another stabbing, and this situation is getting completely out of hand as the weather is starting to drop. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to everybody signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So it's crazy to me how a lot of times the news just kind of repeats, it's cyclical, and the same stories seem to reemerge over and over again. And recently on this channel, we actually covered a brawl that broke out at a migrant shelter processing center where people would go in order to apply for shelter for the cold weather, and a stabbing on Randall's Island. Well, guess what? It seems like those stories have been combined because now we have a story of a brawl that broke out, a melee as being described by the press, where one person ended up being stabbed, and apparently during the whole course of the chaos of this altercation, a security guard might have been the one who actually stabbed this person. Now, how this came to be, you will find out in a little bit, but it is important to note that these situations are getting more and more chaotic due in large part to the fact that shelter space is limited. You have a 30-day time period where you can stay before you're moved out if you're a single person, 60 days if you're a family, and this is creating problem after problem at these specific areas, and we don't have to be dealing with this problem but for the fact that the national border policy just lets all of these immigration fraudsters into our country.
Tell you about a wild chain of events under investigation on Randall's Island tonight, a fight that turned into a melee outside the migrant shelter there, and wait until you hear who's accused of stabbing an asylum seeker.
So that intro right there is actually annoying me right off the top. Of course it's NBC News, and of course they say, oh my god, wait till you hear who is accused of stabbing an asylum seeker. First and foremost, these people are committing asylum fraud. Obviously, that is what is going on. We know that's what's happening because a lot of these people are saying that New York City is worse than their home country, and they kind of want to go back to their home country based on the minimal amount of snow that they experienced here in the United States of America, which we will cover in a later video. But point being, if you're claiming asylum, i.e. you're going to be killed or persecuted in your home country, and that's why you have to be in the United States of America, why would cold weather here in the United States of America, where you're not under threat of being killed by the government, make you think that this is a worse situation than your home country? The only reason that is the case is because you came here for certain benefits. One of the reasons why these migrants are coming to New York City above other locations, and make no mistake, they're voluntarily coming here. The Texas program to ship migrants to sanctuary cities is only a small portion of the overall migrants in New York City, and that is because they expect a right to housing. They expect to be hoteled like previous cycles of migrants in expensive Central Park South hotels.
Volunteer advocates argue the city should put these migrants in some of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the world.
He could have easily, along with Governor Hochul, opened up all the vacant luxury apartments. We are on 57th Street right now. This is Billionaires Row. Half of the super towers on this street are empty.
Of course, that begs the question, who would pay for all those luxury apartments?
And as we saw with that scenario, they're willing to fight for what they believe that they're entitled to and have their advocates demand more, including the most luxurious apartments on Billionaires Row. I'm never going to stop playing this clip in my channel because it's so absurd, so just get ready to see it yet again.
Arrest after arrest on Randall's Island this afternoon. Multiple people placed in handcuffs, all of them migrants from the shelter that's set up here. Cell phone video shows a man struggling on the ground as officers surround him.
I need everybody to back up.
More video shows another man desperate to get past the police, yelling, "My brother, my brother."
Oh, I think Randall.
His 24-year-old brother had just been stabbed. and was being taken away in an ambulance.
So the first thing that I want to know as a citizen of the United States of America, as a taxpayer in the city of New York, is are these 18 arrested migrants going to be deported back to their home country? Are these people who are obviously abusing the asylum system going to get a special treatment that other people who, by the way, immigrant here legally do not get? Normally, if you're convicted of a crime, your citizenship chances are revoked. You are sent back to your home country. Yet we have 18 people that are fighting against the police, brawling with each other, and they're fighting over welfare benefits in the cold when we have our ordinary homeless people who happen to be citizens of this country, residents of New York, people dealing with drug addiction, mental illness, people who have fallen through the cracks, getting shortchanged by these migrants. Are we sending them back, or are we just going to jail them, release them automatically because bail reform, and send them right back to go fighting in another shelter?
This man did not want his face shown on camera, but he says he saw two men get into an argument inside the shelter. A security guard asked them to take it outside, and that's when things escalated.
So here we have a basic scenario. You have two men getting into an argument. Of course, this had broader implications as a total of 18 people were arrested, and more people were involved in this so-called melee. Of course, we don't have footage of this. God forbid you actually see what your tax dollars are going to. God forbid you actually see the great proportion of people who happen to be single men that have entered our country illegally. And according to a witness, a security guard randomly pulled out a knife and stabbed somebody in the neck.
And more people got involved. He says he saw a security guard take out a knife and stab a migrant in the neck. Police could not confirm a security guard was involved, but they did say the victim was stabbed in the neck.
Now look, even though this could be true, to be fair, I've heard crazier stories that have turned out to be true. I am incredibly suspicious of this account from the migrant that is refusing to show his face, because one of the things that I scoured through of all the news reports is to see who was arrested. And again, we have about 18 arrests in this particular event. However, all of the arrests were actually illegal migrants that were at the Randall's Island facility, and not one arrest was of a security guard. And the reason this is interesting is because while the security guard is perfectly capable of going off the rails and stabbing an illegal migrant, the fact of the matter is, New York City self-defense laws in no way, shape, or form protect that. Remember when we covered the Jose Alba case, the 61-year-old guy who was being attacked and dragged out by a career criminal who was out and never should have been released after assaulting a police officer? That guy got arrested for that particular action. That guy was charged with murder, and we did a whole thing about how they criminalize this person's self-defense. Everybody in New York City who acts in self-defense eventually will find themselves being charged with a homicide, especially if they do so with a weapon, because there is no right to defend yourself effectively in the city of New York. So the fact that a security guard allegedly stabbed a migrant in the neck, the way that they're telling it, totally unprovoked, totally random, pulled it out and stabbed him, and yet we have no arrest of said security guard, even as a precaution, because a security guard would have been arrested for using too much force in this scenario, makes no sense to me at all, and is just crazy and asinine in every possible way. What seems like is more likely is that the migrant committed the stabbing, a different migrant, or the knife was being wrestled away from a migrant, and during the tussle, the knife ended up going in a migrant's neck. Now again, I will give the caveat that I could be wrong. I will give the caveat that eventually they could indict a security guard for this. However, there seems to be no third-party verification of this account of events, and that seems very suspicious to me because obviously migrants have extra rights in the city of New York, including the right to get into brawl after brawl after brawl in the shelters that we put up for them, and of course, eventually the right to live in the most luxurious apartments in the city of New York if this activist gets his way.
Do you feel scared?
Well, I don't know, but I don't see nothing but...
This man tells us he did not see the fight, but he says fights do happen here from time to time, often over theft accusations.
Try to take the stuff, the other people, and
Stealing.
Just stealing.
So this guy right here says he didn't see nothing, he doesn't know nothing. We've all heard this shtick before, but what was more interesting to me to take note of is the fact that he said fights are pretty common, and the most common reason for people to be getting into fights is over theft, people being accused of stealing other people's stuff. Now, I will say this, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face. Why do these people who are accused of stealing from other so-called asylum seekers who get into fights over theft of property from other so-called asylum seekers get to remain in our country? Why aren't they being deported? We know that they're economic migrants, we know that they're committing immigration fraud, and now they're stealing the stuff that is being handed out to them individually by the taxpayer, by the way, from each other, and that is resulting in a bunch of different fights. Again, this is the Randall's Island shelter, the exact same place where another migrant was stabbed, and now New York City is deciding that they have to do security protocols, put up metal detectors in order to prevent the outbreak of violence, the appearance of knives, and the frequency of people being threatened with and or stabbed and or jumped, which, by the way, all of this occurred in this particular instance. So we're letting these people into this country completely unvetted. We're giving them their first choice, not only of nation, even though they're claiming asylum, because they're not claiming asylum in any of those other Latin American nations, even though they should, if again, this is about fear of death and not economic migration. And then they're coming to New York City for a right to shelter. We provide them that shelter. They come into the shelters and we don't even check them for weapons. We decide that they're innocent angels. Who cares about the fact that they're mostly single men, mostly fighting age men as they've been described, and then they get into fights, they get into brawls, and we have to send the police in over and over again, our ever-decreasing police force, in order to deal with the chaos that they're engaged in at these camps that we're providing for them. To me, this is a ridiculous absurdity. It's absolutely insane, it's asinine, and in no way, shape, or form should we put up with this. But what does our national media do? They ignore stories like this. They ignore stories of these illegal migrants assaulting and killing American citizens, assaulting and killing each other, and instead they play fun and games with the timeline of a drowning in the Rio Grande, trying to pretend that the Texas National Guard prevented the United States Border Patrol from rescuing them, even though they have to quietly admit later that that was not the case. All of a sudden, the only people we care about are those 3 migrants that drowned in the Rio Grande, which, by the way, I don't want them to drown there. I want to disincentivize people taking this dangerous journey to the United States of America, because they are people, their lives do matter. But the left, which we've known has been true since the original Black Lives Matter riots in Ferguson and these Black Lives Matter riots, knows that lives only matter when you can leverage their deaths for political causes, for political purposes. So if this person ends up dying, if he ends up passing away due to what went down here, that's going to be put in the no big deal category. Unless, of course, what they're praying for, a white security guard actually did, for no reason at all whatsoever, stab this guy in the neck, they're not going to talk about it. But if this turns out to be what I suspect, that it was either some kind of defensive maneuver with a knife that was brought up by the migrants, or this person was stabbed by a migrant and the media is just running with the false report, this story will be buried. In fact, they're already kind of burying it, because why do they want you to think about violence in the detention centers? Because they know for a fact that immigration is the #1 issue in America. Its interest is rising in this country, and Biden has huge negatives on that particular issue.
Police say in all 18 people were arrested, but it's still unclear what role they all played in this melee or how it began. The man with a knife who attacked someone is still at large, and that victim is in the hospital.
Again, take note of this. Now, it could be a security guard. That could be what happened. That could be what occurred here. I am not dismissing that, but it is very interesting to me that they're saying that the man that was behind this is still at large, when you would think it would be very easy to identify somebody who worked for the Randall's Island shelter as a security guard as the suspect, so that you can release that description to the public. It would seem like that should be something that they could get right out there in an instant, because again, the suspect is still at large. It's obviously a dangerous person. He stabbed somebody, according to the account that they're peddling, unprovoked in the neck. But to me, it's just more likely that a migrant would be able to blend in with the migrants and avoid arrest arrest and avoid being caught up in this particular stabbing. Again, there are thousands of migrants there. There's not that many security guards. There was a lot of witnesses to this particular stabbing. It ended up setting off a melee, and yet we have no reports of a security guard being attacked. We have no reports of somebody identifying a security guard, and we have no reports of the shelter or from the NYPD of a security guard at this detention facility turned fugitive being at large with any kind of description. I again will say, you can prove me wrong with this. It could be the case. It could have not went down in all the different alternative scenarios that I put forward, but as of right now, based on the early reporting, which again is subject to change, I find this account incredibly unreliable.
A police helicopter overhead after a fight outside the migrant shelter on Randall's Island. Police say around 3:30 Thursday afternoon, a 24-year-old man was stabbed in the neck and rushed to Harlem Hospital. Police say 18 people, including the suspected stabber, were taken into custody. You can see in this video several men and a woman being taken away in handcuffs. It's the second stabbing at this facility in less than 2 weeks.
So I don't usually get to do an update mid-shooting of a video, but it turns out that the initial reporting of a security guard randomly stabbing somebody in the neck was wrong. It was inaccurate. Now, Pix11 also wrongly reported this story as well. They reported that the security guard was in fact stabbed, the victim of the stabbing, but that turns out to not be true. According to the latest updates, the police have cleared the security guard that was initially suspected based on that lying migrants' witness testimony, and they've arrested and charged 5 migrants in connection with this stabbing and issued 12 additional summonses to illegal migrants as well. And those who were arrested were Felix Cardona, age 29, who actually threw a rock at the victim. He was charged with attempted assault. And the others who were arrested were Jose Gobara, Ladymar Montero, age 18, Leon Eicher, age 19, and Hacion Romero, also age 19. I know you love my Spanish pronunciation of some of those names. Now, they also charged them with weapons possession because they had a bunch of knives, tampering with physical evidence, and a bunch of other things. Now, I can't wait for them to not get deported over this, even though they deserve it based on this list of charges, and believe me, I am taking note of those 12 summonses because I think that is just the slap on the wrist of slaps on the wrist. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is it something that we should be concerned about, that migrants are killing each other over welfare benefits that honestly I don't believe that they're entitled to? I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about more violence at the shelters. Till next time.